I was recently sitting in a quiet cafe, listening to a local business owner vent his frustrations. He was leaning forward, voice hushed but urgent, talking about the threat of ending the 6x1 work schedule.
I think I know where this is going.
You have to think about the person who provides the jobs, he kept saying, his hands gesturing as if he were protecting this fragile flame. To him, the math was just simple. If his employees worked fewer days, his world would crumble.
Right. It's this narrative of moral conviction that he's not just a boss, he's a guardian of the economy.
Exactly. A man whose risk justified every single hour his staff spent on the floor. And it sounded so reasonable, almost altruistic. But then I looked outside.
And what did you see? I
saw the delivery driver pulling up. It was a scorching afternoon, and the driver just looked hollow, not just tired, but spiritually spent.
One day off a week.
One single day. One day to be a father, a friend, or just a human being before the cycle swallowed him again. And that's when the reasonableness of the business owner's argument started to feel like a very carefully constructed mask.
It's a social reflex, isn't it? We're always told to think of the employer.
Always. It frames the job as this generous gift from the capital owner, rather than, value created by the person actually doing the work. And what's fascinating is how this script just never changes.
Never. Anytime the prospect of giving people back their time comes up, there's this chorus of impending doom.
They said the 8-hour workday would destroy us. They said paid vacations would bankrupt the nation. Yet the economy survived.
Of course it did. What actually happens in these moments isn't a crisis of production. It's a crisis of a very specific kind of profit.
A profit that relies on the raw exhaustion of the workforce rather than on innovation or efficiency. Why is it that in a world of peak technology, we are told that the only way to stay afloat is to keep millions of people on the brink of burnout?
And that's the real question. The answer isn't in the economic data. It's in a much deeper, more uncomfortable truth about who really owns your time.
That framing is just. It's essential because it gets right to the ideological conflict at the heart of our deep dives today. We're looking at this profound legislative and social battle unfolding in Brazil over the right to time.
A battle to restructure the entire Brazilian workweek, moving beyond this traditional and frankly, increasingly unsustainable 6x1 work schedule.
Okay, let's unpack this for someone, say, outside of Brazil who might only know a standard Monday to Friday job. What exactly is the 6x1 system, and why has it become such a lightning rod for this whole labor reform debate?
Well, the 6x1 system is pretty much what it sounds like. You work for 6 consecutive days, and then you get one single day of rest.
6 days on, 1 day off.
Exactly. And this is the dominant model across huge parts of the Brazilian service and commerce sectors. So you're talking about retail workers, supermarket staff, factory workers, security guards.
So it's really the norm for lower income workers, the ones who don't have the leverage to negotiate for something better.
That's the critical contrast you see. For many of us, especially in white-collar jobs, the 5x2 model is normal, Monday to Friday.
Right, with 2 days off. Saturday and Sunday.
And that 2-day break allows for a psychological and physical recovery that's actually restorative. It lets you engage with your family, with your life. The 6x1 schedule, on the other hand, it just subjects the worker to this relentless cycle of exhaustion and really minimal recovery.
But is it even legal under Brazil's current labor laws? Can you make someone work 6 days in a row like that?
Legally, it's right on the line. The federal constitution sets the maximum work week at 44 hours. That's typically 8 hours a day.
Okay.
And the main labor law, the CLT, it mandates a minimum of 24 consecutive hours of weekly rest. And it says this rest should preferably be on Sundays.
Preferably, so not mandatory.
Not mandatory. So the 6x1 system, by giving that one 24-hour block of rest, it stays just inside the lines of the law. But as we're going to see, just complying with that legal minimum has proven to be devastating for people's health and ultimately really inefficient for the economy.
So it's technically legal, but functionally extractive. What's the specific move being made to change this? How are they trying to reform a decades-old structure?
The main push is through a constitutional amendment, a PEC. It's known as PEC 8/2025.
An amendment to the Constitution. That's a massive undertaking. That's not just passing a new law.
No, it requires a huge political consensus. And this proposal, which is being championed by figures like Congresswoman Erica Hilton, it has 2 main goals. First, to just explicitly abolish the 6x1 schedule altogether.
Get rid of it.
And second, and this is maybe even more significant, to reduce the maximum legal work week from 44 hours down to 36 hours.
36 hours, wow. I mean, that immediately suggests a 4-day work week for most people, a 4-by-3 model.
Yeah.
4 days on, 3 days off. This is where the political fight must get really intense.
Oh, it absolutely is. The proposal has gotten really strong backing from the political left. President Lula da Silva has even publicly called the 44-hour 6-by-1 model outdated for a modern economy.
So they're framing it as a kind of civilizational advancement.
Yes, and as a necessary response to the public health crisis of burnout.
So on the other side, what are the specific arguments from the resistance? I'm talking about the opposition, the business community. They can't just be saying the sky is falling, right? What are their concrete fears?
They voice three main concerns, and you hear them over and over. First is immediate cost inflation.
Okay.
They argue that if you reduce the work week from 44 to 36 hours but keep the pay the same, you're effectively raising the hourly cost of labor by, around 22%. They say that cost has to be passed on to the consumer.
So higher prices, what's the second point?
Increased unemployment. This is their big one, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. They argue that smaller businesses just can't absorb that kind of cost height and will have to lay people off.
And the third?
A rise in informal labor, unregistered, unprotected work. The fear is that businesses will just try to go around the new law, which would end up hurting the very workers it's supposed to protect.
Those are serious concerns, especially for the small businesses. But let's connect this back to what you said about the ideological conflict, that whole think of the employer mantra. How does that fit into Brazil's economic structure?
Well, this gets into the very nature of how profit is made in Brazil. The source material suggests that this reliance on cheap, extended labor isn't an accident. It's endemic to an economic model that often favors something called rentism.
Rentism.
It's a preference among the economic elite for secure, low-risk profits that come from financial mechanisms, things like high interest rates, tax exemptions, rather than from making big, risky investments in new technology or innovation.
So in other words, why bother buying an expensive new machine when you can just burn out a cheap human being?
That's a blunt way to put it, but yes, that's the logic. If capital is guaranteed a safe return somewhere else, the incentive to generate profit through efficiency just disappears. The easiest path becomes extracting value by extending work time. The 6-by-1 schedule is the daily practical result of that economic inertia.
So the resistance to changing it isn't just a technical argument about productivity.
No, it's an ideological function. It's designed to protect a specific and very exploitative profit structure.
Which means the entire economic viability of the 6-by-1 system depends, fundamentally, on having an exhausted workforce.
Yeah.
And when you look past the rhetoric and at the actual lives of people on this schedule, that's where the failure of the system becomes brutally clear.
It's the human cost that provides the most damning evidence that this model is just structurally flawed. The 6-by-1 schedule is actively creating a public health and social crisis.
I was really struck by the story of Beatriz, the retail clerk. She described her one day off, not as a day off, but as a recovery ward. That phrase, it tells you everything.
It makes you realize that her day of rest isn't leisure. It's a medically necessary pause forced by chronic depletion.
Exactly. When the debate is framed around leisure, it can sound like a luxury.
But when you frame it around the need for your body and mind to simply recover enough to face the next 6 days, it becomes a basic human right. Beatrice's migraines, her overwhelming need to just sleep. These are classic symptoms of the systemic depletion caused by the 6-by-1.
It prevents any real engagement with life. She said she felt like a ghost in her own house.
And that experience is universal for millions of people working these shifts.
Let's ground this in the hard medical data. What are the specific quantifiable health costs that are linked to this kind of continuous work with so little recovery?
We see two major categories of physical harm. The first, and probably the most common, involves musculoskeletal disorders. In Portuguese, they're known as ler dort, which basically translates to repetitive strain injury.
And these are chronic, debilitating injuries.
Absolutely. They're rampant among cashiers, stockers, assembly line workers, anyone who has to stand for long periods or make the same movements over and over.
And the 6-by-1 schedule makes it worse because there's no real recovery window.
Exactly. The body has no time to repair the microtraumas. So you see a direct link to tendinitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, chronic back pain, things that can lead to permanent disability. And the cost of treating all of this puts a huge strain on the public healthcare system.
So beyond the joint and muscle problems, the continuous stress from the schedule is literally damaging people's cardiovascular systems.
That's the second and frankly more lethal category. Chronic, long working hours trigger a sustained stress response in the body, which elevates your cortisol levels.
Oh, that's a direct precursor to really serious problems.
Yes, hypertension, heart attacks, strokes. The link isn't theoretical. It's backed by major global studies.
We have that data from the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization, and it makes the connection impossible to deny.
Right. A huge 2021 study by the WHO and ILO attributed 745,000 global deaths in a single year, 2016, specifically to diseases caused by working over 55 hours a week.
And while the legal max in Brazil is 44 hours, a lot of people in the 6x1 system are pushed into overtime or have these long, exhausting commutes that push their effective time way over that 55-hour threshold.
They absolutely do. And the risk percentages from that study are just frightening.
What were they?
Working over 55 hours a week increases your risk of stroke by a staggering 35%, and your risk of heart disease by 17% compared to a standard 35 to 40-hour week.
That's just incredible. And that's not even counting accidents.
No. The accumulated fatigue from the 6x1 schedule just tanks your attention and judgment. That translates directly into higher rates of workplace accidents. In 2022, Brazil reported over 612,000 occupational accident notifications. The 6x1 fuels this by prioritizing being present over being alert.
So the economic model is literally sacrificing human life and health. It's turning the workplace into a continuous threat. Let's shift to the mental health crisis, because that seems to be the central argument of the reform movement.
The psychological toll is arguably the most pervasive and defining failure of the 6x1 system. And the prime diagnosis here is burnout syndrome.
A state of total exhaustion, physical, mental, emotional, from chronic workplace stress.
When rest is inadequate, that stress just compounds until it becomes an incapacitating condition.
And what does the data show? How common is this in Brazil?
The statistics are really sobering. Researchers estimate that about 30% of the entire Brazilian workforce is at high risk of developing burnout. And in 2022 alone, the Social Security system had over 209,000 workers who were absent from their jobs specifically due to mental disorders.
That's an enormous strain on public finances, not to mention the companies. And we also see a direct link between the schedule and clinical mental illnesses, right?
Yes, studies have shown that workers on these limited West schedules have roughly twice the chance of developing clinical anxiety and depression compared to people with more balanced schedules.
Why is that?
It's profoundly linked to a lack of control over their personal life. When you don't have enough time to manage your own affairs, your family relationships, or even just do something you enjoy, it creates this feeling of existential dread and helplessness.
And speaking of personal lives, we have to talk about the disproportionate impact this has on women. The structural inequality it just reinforces.
This is often called the double burden. Women are subject to the formal demands of the 6x1 job, the 44-hour work week, and then on top of that, they're shouldering the vast majority of unpaid domestic labor.
And we can actually quantify that difference in time, can't we?
We can. Data from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the IBGE, showed that in 2022, women spent an average of 21.3 hours a week on domestic tasks. Men, only 11.7 hours.
So you layer a 6x1 job on top of that 21 plus hours of housework.
For millions of women, especially the ones who are heads of household, and there are over 11 million of them in Brazil, the total weekly time dedicated to labor easily goes over 60 hours.
And that time deficit must create a massive roadblock, both personally and professionally.
It's a vicious cycle. The chronic lack of time and energy acts as a structural barrier. It prevents women from getting more education, from taking qualification courses, from moving up in their careers. The 6x1 system, combined with societal expectations, becomes a machine for maintaining professional stagnation and gender inequality.
It sounds like a problem so entrenched that it's now being addressed directly by the courts. And this leads to one of the most compelling insights here: the growing legal recognition of dano existential, or existential damage.
Dano existential is a critical legal development. It shows the judiciary is moving beyond just calculating unpaid overtime. They're acknowledging that excessive work hours inflict a unique and profound kind of damage.
So what is the legal definition?
It's defined as an injury that systematically frustrates a worker's personal projects, their family life, their leisure, and their fundamental dignity.
So the courts are basically saying that when your job prevents you from being a functioning human being outside of work, your human rights have been violated.
Exactly. They're treating the systematic theft of personal time as a violation of the principle of human dignity, which is enshrined in the Brazilian Constitution. The rulings are solidifying the idea that the sheer duration of the work is a direct constitutional violation.
Let's look at some specific examples. How is this being applied in real cases? What of the truck driver?
That case is a clear example of extreme overscheduling. The driver was found to have worked for up to 4 months straight without proper rest. The company tried to argue they'd paid all the overtime, but the court said that was irrelevant.
So how did they prove it?
They used the vehicle's tracking reports. The judges established a pattern of shifts that routinely began at 5 a.m. and often ended after 10 p.m. The driver was awarded 5,000 RIAs in damages specifically for Dano Existential. The court's reasoning was that this kind of habitual, excessive schedule makes rest, leisure, and social life functionally impossible.
So it's not about the pay, it's about the existence the job allows you to have. What about the case involving the parent? That one was particularly striking.
The maternal case is maybe the most poignant. It was an employee working 13 to 14-hour days with irregular rest, a classic extreme version of the 6x1 grind. She was awarded 10,000 RIAs. And crucially, the judge specifically pointed out the damage to her relationship with her 12-year-old daughter.
So the court took family impact into direct account.
Explicitly. The ruling argued that the extensive hours severely hindered her ability to provide care, guidance, and affection during a critical stage of her daughter's life. The court said the job was preventing her from fulfilling her parental duties, a core part of her dignity and her personal life project.
And the size of the award seems to scale with how bad the violation is.
It does. We saw that in the electrician's case. This person was working a punishing 12 hours a day, 72 hours a week. The Superior Labor Court, which is the highest labor court in the country, ordered the energy company to pay 50,000 RIAs in damages.
50,000.
And the presiding minister in the case issued a really strong statement affirming that systematically reduced time impedes the exercise of fundamental rights. In these severe cases, the damage is no longer just presumed. The court sees it as effectively configured. These rulings are setting powerful precedents. They're telling businesses that their exploitative schedules carry a real moral liability.
These legal interventions are basically the state itself admitting the current structure is unsustainable. Which brings us back to the core question. If the 6x1 is so destructive, is it really necessary for the Brazilian economy? We need to tackle this myth that more hours automatically means more output.
The economic evidence strongly suggests that the necessity of the 6x1 model is a myth, one that's perpetuated by some really outdated practices. The argument that we need these long hours for economic survival reveals a deep productivity paradox.
So where does Brazil rank in terms of hours worked versus actual output?
Brazil is 7th among all G20 countries for the sheer quantity of weekly working hours. But despite that high volume of input, national productivity remains notoriously stagnant.
Which immediately tells you there's a serious structural problem. High effort is not translating into efficient output.
Exactly. The economic model favors extracting maximum time, that low-cost labor input, over investing in rational production methods, in technology and efficiency.
I want to focus on the story of Ricardo, the factory owner, because it illustrates this national bottleneck so perfectly. He was convinced his profit came from exhausting his staff, which led to a profound irony.
Yes, Ricardo was the classic example of this rentier laziness. When his manager proposed investing in automated precision tools that would have reduced the need for intense labor and allowed for a shorter week, Ricardo just flatly refused.
What was his reasoning?
He called innovation a luxury. He truly believed that his profitability was secured by squeezing every last possible hour out of his 6x1 workers.
And what was the predictable, yet completely avoidable result of that thinking?
The irony was swift and it was expensive. The sheer exhaustion of his workforce led to a tripled error rate in production. He ended spending far more on wasted materials, on fixing mistakes, and on managing high turnover than the automation would have cost in the first place.
So his profit model, based on extraction, was actually less profitable than one based on efficiency.
Precisely. And that anecdote perfectly captures why Brazil's productivity is stagnant. The system prizes presence. The number of hours you're in the building over performance and technological advancement. If labor is cheap and disposable, the incentive to upgrade your equipment or improve your processes just vanishes.
It really does. And, the resistance to the 4x3 model, it mirrors every historical argument against past labor advancements.
It's the same script. When the 8-hour workday was proposed, when paid vacations were mandated, when the 13th salary was instituted, the business lobbies claimed every single time that these changes would destroy the economy.
And yet, none of them did. You could argue they actually stabilized the economy by expanding the middle class and improving social well-being. They forced businesses to professionalize and innovate.
That is the essential historical lesson here. The current crisis is not a crisis of production capability. It's a crisis of an exploitative profit model. If you structurally reduce the work week from 44 to 36 hours without a pay cut, you force capital owners to recognize that an hour of labor is now more valuable.
Which pressures them to find genuine, systemic gains in efficiency.
Exactly. A worker who is chronically exhausted isn't just prone to errors. They contribute to high turnover, which is a measurable drag on profits. Eliminating the 6x1 schedule essentially forces the Brazilian economy into the 21st century by making exploitation less financially viable than innovation.
So the idea that the 6x1 is necessary is an economic illusion. But, theories and historical comparisons only go so far. We need to look at what happens when Brazilian companies actually do it. Which brings us to the results of the 4-day workweek pilot program.
This pilot program, which ran from 2023 to 2024, was a crucial, large-scale experiment. It was a 9-month trial run in collaboration with 4-Day Week Global, specifically to gather hard, local data.
So what were the parameters? How many companies were involved, and what was the core model they used?
The trial started with 22 companies, though one dropped out, so we have data from 21 firms and about 280 employees. The key was their strict adherence to the 100.80.100 model.
180-100.
100% of the pay for 80% of the time, in exchange for a commitment to maintain 100% of the productivity. This standard ensures that any success is genuinely from efficiency gains, not just from employees feeling good for a little while.
And how did they manage the logistics of that extra day off?
Most companies chose a unified day off, usually Friday, creating a long weekend for everyone. But recognizing that some sectors need continuous operation, a few used a staggered system, splitting the day off between Monday and Friday. And a small minority even let workers choose their day off, which shows how adaptable the model is.
Okay, let's get to the results. These were gathered mid-trial in April 2024. The resistance warns of production drops. What did the data actually show?
The results were overwhelmingly positive, and they directly refute that narrative. The key finding was that productivity didn't just hold steady. In many areas, it surged.
Really?
Yes. Project execution, for example, saw a remarkable 61.5% boost. The rate of meeting deadlines improved by 44.4%. And maybe most telling, creativity and innovation, the very things that get crushed by exhaustion, jumped by 58.5%.
Wow. That suggests that the condensed schedule forces everyone to eliminate low-value time sinks like brainless meetings and just focus intensely when they are working.
Absolutely. The model compels better organizational design. It forces management to focus on measurable output instead of hours logged, which is a fundamental culture shift from presence to efficiency. It's exactly what the national economy needs.
Let's go back to the human cost.
Yeah.
What was the impact on well-being? Because that's the core justification for ending the 6x1.
The changes in well-being were transformative. Work-related stress went down by 62.7%. Frequent work-related exhaustion, the hallmark of the 6x1 system, was reduced by a massive 64.5%.
74%.
We saw a 50% reduction in insomnia, which suggests workers were getting genuinely restorative rest. And participants reported having 82.4% more energy for their tasks.
And the pilot gives us hard data that directly counters that psychological damage, the dano-existential that we talked about earlier.
It provides strong evidence that giving back time restores human capacity. Workers reported a 78.1% increase in the energy they had for family and friends. Collaboration with colleagues, which always suffers in high-stress environments, increased by 85.4%.
That's incredible.
And get this, 46.3% of participants reported exercising more than 3 times a week. That shows the extra time was immediately converted into health maintenance, which lowers future public health costs. This isn't just about making employees happier, it's about making them healthier, better parents, more engaged citizens.
And it's clear this shift didn't just happen because of the pilot. Some visionary Brazilian companies were already doing this before the trial even started. Who were the pioneers?
The pet products company Z-Dog is often seen as the first major Brazilian pioneer. They adopted a form of the 4-day week way back in February 2021. Their model gave employees every other Wednesday off.
And what happened?
They saw immediate results, maintained output, significantly higher employee contentment, and a clear advantage in attracting and retaining top talent in a very competitive market.
And what about the tech sector? That's where you'd expect to see this kind of innovation.
Tech innovators followed right away. A MarTech startup called Winin made the 4-day week permanent in 2021 after a successful trial. They focused specifically on mental health, reporting a 41.9% increase in employees' focus on their well-being. Similarly, Signified, a fraud protection company, adopted the model in 2022, and they noted consistent productivity and critical improvements in recruitment and retention.
So it's competitive advantage, not a liability.
That's what the market is showing. While the political machine is stuck debating the ideology of the 6x1, the market itself is already proving it's inefficient. And all this success must be feeding back into the regulatory environment.
It is. The legal landscape is shifting to acknowledge the psychological fallout of the 6x1 culture. We have two key regulatory changes. First is the update to NR1, or Norma Regulamentadora on 1.
What's the significance of that update?
The NR1 update is a foundational shift. It now mandates that companies include psychosocial risks. That means stress, anxiety, moral harassment in their mandatory risk management program.
That's huge. So companies now have to assess their workplace for psychological threats with the same rigor they apply to, say, a physical hazard like unguarded machinery.
Precisely. It turns burnout from a personal failing into a workplace compliance issue. And the punitive phase of this regulation starts in May 2026. This gives businesses a deadline to restructure schedules, ensure proper breaks, and implement mental health support. It's a direct attack on the high-pressure culture fostered by the 6x1.
And beyond mandating compliance, isn't the state also trying to incentivize good behavior with a new law?
Yes, Law 14.8312024 creates a voluntary mental health promoter company certification. It's basically a stamp of approval, signaling to the market that a company adheres to high standards of mental health support.
So it aligns with modern ESG principles, environmental, social, and governance.
Exactly. Companies that pursue this are showing they understand that guaranteeing psychological health isn't just good ethics, it's good business.
So we have all this evidence, the pilot proves it works, the legal system is acknowledging the damage, yet the resistance to widespread change is still so powerful. What is the fundamental non-data-driven barrier here?
We're watching a clash between empirical data and these deeply entrenched cultural and ideological beliefs about the nature of work. The resistance often dismisses the pilot data by arguing that the 6x1 schedule is a cultural necessity for the Brazilian temperament.
That takes us right back to that story of the São Paulo boardroom, where the young consultant's data on GDP boost was just dismissed by the older partners with that exact argument.
It highlights this perception of time as a commodity, as a display of control. The older, entrenched view sees time as territory to be occupied. The boss judges your effort by how many hours you're physically present, not by the quality of your output.
So this ideological resistance is just a way of protecting the status quo, the power dynamic where the employer owns the worker's time.
They cling to the idea that the only way to succeed is through sheer volume of effort, and they're completely detached from the global economic data that proves otherwise.
Well, if the economics are so clear and the human cost is so high, let's zoom out. How does Brazil's debate stack up against the global movements toward a 4-day work week?
The international comparisons are crucial because they show this is a global trend driven by modern economic realities, not some specific national temperament. Take Iceland, for example. Between 2015 and 2019, they ran huge pilot programs, reducing hours to 35-36 with no pay cuts.
And the results there?
Maintained or even increased productivity, coupled with massive improvements in worker well-being. It was a critical test case that proved the model works in diverse sectors.
And then we had that massive, highly publicized trial in the United Kingdom.
Right. The UK trial involved 61 companies, a huge data set. And after the trial, 92% of the companies chose to keep the reduced schedule permanently.
92%.
They cited drastically increased motivation, less stress, and critically for the businesses, a significant drop in staff turnover. The data just unequivocally confirms that the 4-day week is a sustainable business model.
Even in places known for intense work cultures like Japan, we see companies responding to this pressure.
Absolutely. Japan is maybe the most relevant comparison because of their national crisis of karoshi, or death by overwork. Companies there are actively implementing shorter weeks as a countermeasure. Microsoft Japan reported a staggering productivity increase over 40% after adopting a 4-day work week.
So efficiency gains can rapidly eclipse the loss of an entire day's labor.
And Belgium showed a different, more flexible path.
Their legislation from 2022 allows workers to concentrate their standard 40 hours into 4 days. This is crucial because it offers flexibility without mandating overall reduction in hours. It just proves that flexibility in scheduling is itself a powerful tool. The global evidence is unified. The move toward fewer, more productive hours is the direction of modern, sustainable growth.
Okay, so given all this compelling data, the successful domestic pilot, let's go back to the political outlook for PEC 8/2025 in Brazil. What are the mechanisms in the amendment that are designed to overcome that political resistance and those legitimate business concerns?
The PEC proposes the 36-hour 4x3 WINT, but the key to its potential success is the implementation mechanism. The proposal makes the final regulation of this shift dependent on collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs.
And why is that mechanism so important?
It introduces flexibility. Instead of a sudden, rigid mandate that has to apply equally to a massive retail chain and a small neighborhood bakery, the CBA allows unions and employers to negotiate how the reduction is actually implemented.
So they can tailor it to their specific sector.
Exactly. They can discuss modified hours, benefits packages, scheduling, all tailored to the specific needs of their industry and region. It's designed to mitigate the exact risks the opposition raises, especially the impact on small and medium-sized businesses.
So that resistance argument that a blanket change would crush SMEs is countered by a mechanism that allows those very SMEs to negotiate their own transition plan.
Precisely. However, the opposition is still very vocal, repeating the fears that even with CBAs, the costs will lead to widespread job cuts, or even worse, push more labor into the informal sector.
So if businesses just evade the regulation, workers lose all their protections, which would undermine the entire goal.
And that remains a core, non-ideological obstacle in the political negotiation.
So what's driving the pressure to push this forward against such entrenched resistance? Because you don't amend a constitution with just legislative will. You need massive political leverage.
The leverage is coming from the ground up. It's driven by a massive social mobilization. The constitutional amendment is heavily supported by the Vida Além do Trabalho movement, which means life beyond work. And this movement has been incredibly effective at translating individual exhaustion into collective political power.
How are they doing it?
They are masters of social media. They use hashtags like hashtag #FemDesclaw6x1 and the 6x1 schedule to generate sustained public pressure. And crucially, they've backed this up with a massive popular petition that has over 1.3 million signatures.
And that level of public support makes the issue impossible for the legislature to just ignore.
It does, and their messaging frames this as more than just a labor negotiation. They frame it not as a demand for a few more hours off, but as a fundamental fight for the right to leisure, for family life, for human dignity.
It's an argument that modern progress should be measured in time, free from labor, allowing people to be healthy and fulfilled, not just measuring profit extracted from their exhaustion.
This deep dive into the fight against the 6x1 schedule really reveals this critical confluence of factors. You have the legal system recognizing existential damage, the economic data proving the productivity paradox, and social movements demanding a civilizational adjustment.
The entire debate really hinges on a single choice. Will the Brazilian economy cling to an exploitative model that extracts value through sheer exhaustion, or will it embrace the global norm one that prioritizes innovation and efficiency to grant workers the time necessary for a healthy, dignified existence? The evidence from the pilot programs and the courts suggests that the old calculus is no longer sustainable, forcing a fundamental reckoning with the uncomfortable truth about who really owns your time.